Imagine a world where almost everything was trying to kill you. A world where lions, leopards, and saber-toothed cats hunted the plains with unmatched ferocity. A world where crocodiles lurked in rivers, snakes slid silently through the grass, and eagles swooped from the skies. On the ground, massive hyenas, jackals, and packs of wild dogs roamed in search of weakness. To survive here was nearly impossible. Yet it was in this hostile environment that the very first true humans arose. Their name was Homo Habilis, the handy man. They lived more than 2 million years ago, between 2.4 and 1.4 million years before today, in eastern and southern Africa. They were not tall, not especially strong, and certainly not the dominant species of their age. They were fragile, awkward, and vulnerable, but they carried something extraordinary: the beginnings of human ingenuity. And that fragile spark, born in the most dangerous of worlds, would ignite the story of us. To understand the challenge faced by Homo habilis, you need to picture their environment. Africa at the dawn of the Pleistocene was a land of giants. Herds of elephants larger than any alive today marched across the savannas. Gigantic buffalo, massive zebras, and antelope filled the plains. Grazers attracted predators, and predators attracted scavengers. The food chain was dense, ruthless, and unforgiving. In this world, Homo habilis was small. Most individuals stood barely over 1 meter tall, though some males may have reached 1.30 meters. They weighed less than 50 kilograms. Compared to a lion, which could weigh more than 200 kilograms, or a leopard, which could sprint at terrifying speeds, they were nothing. Their arms were still long, more like apes than modern humans, suggesting they climbed trees often to escape danger. Their faces jutted forward with primitive features, their jaws strong for chewing tough plants and meat. Their brains were small, about 600 cubic centimeters on average, less than half the size of ours today. By most measures, they were unimpressive. And yet, appearances deceive. While their bodies looked weak, their minds were evolving. The brain of Homo habilis was already larger than that of earlier hominins like Australopithecus. That extra brain power opened the door to new possibilities: tools, cooperation, and problem solving. These weren't just survival tricks, they were the foundations of humanity. The first and most crucial of these was stone tools. Archaeologists have found thousands of them at sites linked to Homo habilis. They were not elegant or refined, but they were revolutionary. By striking one rock against another, our ancestors produced sharp flakes. These flakes could cut flesh, slice through hides, and crack open bones to reach the nutritious marrow inside. With stone, they turned dead animals into feasts. But the invention of tools didn't just give them food. It gave them access to a new niche in the ecosystem: scavenging. Picture the African plains 2 million years ago. A pride of lions brings down a zebra. Hyenas circle, waiting for scraps. Vultures descend, eager for leftovers. And then, from the edge of the chaos, appear small figures, Homo habilis. They carry stones in their hands. When the predators have eaten their fill and moved on, these fragile humans step in. With sharp flakes, they strip the carcass of every last piece of flesh. They smash bones for marrow, something few other animals could access. They turn scraps into survival. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. By becoming scavengers, Homo habilis found a way to live in a world dominated by killers far stronger than themselves. Of course, scavenging was dangerous. Approaching a kill site meant risking encounters with lions, hyenas, or other scavengers. Fossil evidence suggests Homo habilis often lost. Many bones show puncture marks from big cats, proof that these early humans were hunted as often as they hunted. They were prey as much as predator. Life expectancy was short. Many died before reaching adulthood. So why didn't they vanish? Why didn't they go extinct like so many other fragile creatures? The answer lies in cooperation. Homo habilis didn't face the savanna alone. They lived in groups, probably small bands of 20 or 30 individuals. Together, they could watch for predators, care for young, and share food. Fossil remains of injured individuals show evidence of survival long after wounds should have been fatal, suggesting they were cared for by their companions. This was new. Other primates looked after each other, yes, But humans were beginning to elevate cooperation into a survival strategy. Around campfires, if they had fire, which is debated, they may have huddled together at night, protected by numbers. In the daylight, they worked as a unit, some watching the horizon while others cut meat. Slowly, bonds of family and community became as vital as sharp stones. Even with tools and cooperation, survival was still on a knife's edge. Every day was a gamble. Crocodiles lurked in rivers, ambushing those who came to drink. Snakes delivered venomous bites. Birds of prey swooped on infants. Diseases and parasites struck relentlessly. Against all of this, Homo habilis had only their wits. But wits were enough. Archaeological evidence suggests they were opportunistic feeders, eating whatever they could: roots, fruits, seeds, insects, small animals, and scavenged meat. Their diet was broad, and that flexibility made them resilient. While specialized predators could starve when prey disappeared, Homo habilis could turn to plants, marrow, or insects to survive. They were the ultimate improvisers, and their tools were not limited to cutting. Some stones were used for pounding, smashing nuts or bones. Others may have served as rudimentary hammers. With each generation, techniques were passed down, perhaps by observation, perhaps by early forms of communication. This transmission of knowledge was critical. It allowed improvements to last beyond a single lifetime. Evolution wasn't just happening in their bodies, it was happening in their culture. But it is important to remember how fragile their position was. For every success, there was failure. For every carcass they stripped, there were predators who took them in return. Fossil records show that Homo habilis and Australopithecus may have coexisted for hundreds of thousands of years. They were not alone in their struggle. Other hominins, cousins with different adaptations, walked the same landscapes. Some climbed trees better. Some chewed tougher foods. The future of humanity was not guaranteed. At any moment, our lineage might have been the one to vanish. And yet, something in Homo habilis endured. Their brains kept growing. Their tools kept improving. Their social bonds deepened. Against overwhelming odds, they refused to disappear. This was the crucible of humanity, a time when everything was against us: predators, disease, hunger, weakness. But from that crucible came resilience. The fragile spark of ingenuity, lit in the hands of Homo habilis, would grow brighter with every generation. Subscribe if you liked the video. The life of Homo habilis was a daily struggle, not just against predators, but against the environment itself. Africa 2 million years ago was a land in constant change. The climate shifted between wetter and drier periods, reshaping the landscape again and again. Forests gave way to open grasslands, and rivers swelled or shrank with the rains. To survive here required not just strength but adaptability. And adaptability was what Homo habilis slowly mastered. While their bodies were still ape-like in many ways, with long arms for climbing trees and curved fingers for gripping branches, their legs were becoming more human. Fossil evidence shows that they could walk upright with relative efficiency, covering long distances across the savanna. This was crucial. Walking freed their hands for carrying tools, food, and even infants. It also allowed them to travel in search of carcasses or edible plants. Step by step, their mobility gave them a chance to survive in a world where danger lurked at every turn. But mobility was not enough. Tools gave them access to resources, but tools also created new dangers. By cutting open carcasses and consuming meat, Homo habilis stepped into a new ecological role, one that put them in direct competition with some of the fiercest animals alive. Hyenas, for example, were not scavengers of last resort as they are often seen today. In the early Pleistocene, they were apex predators in their own right, strong enough to crush bones with jaws more powerful than those of lions. To steal food from a hyena meant risking death. And yet, Homo habilis did it anyway. Their tools allowed them to process carcasses quickly, to take what they could before being driven off. Sometimes they succeeded. Other times, they paid with their lives. It was a dangerous gamble, but it meant survival when plants were scarce or seasons turned harsh. This boldness, this willingness to take risks others would not, was part of what set them apart. Archaeological sites tell us more about how they lived. At places like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, layers of stone tools, animal bones, and even traces of living spaces reveal patterns of behavior. Here, we see evidence that Homo habilis didn't just wander alone. They gathered in groups, returning to the same places again and again. Some sites show clusters of bones with cut marks, suggesting that carcasses were brought back to central spots to be processed and shared. This implies planning, cooperation, and perhaps even the first hints of social rules. Who eats first, who guards the group, who teaches the young. And teaching was vital. Unlike instincts passed down through genes, tool use required learning. A child born into a group of Homo habilis didn't know how to strike a stone to make a cutting edge. They had to watch, imitate, and practice. This meant that knowledge was flowing across generations. It was fragile. If a group died out, its skills might be lost. But it was also revolutionary. Culture, in its earliest form, was being born. Yet with culture came conflict. Fossil evidence suggests that Homo habilis may not have been alone even within their own genus. Other species, like Homo rudolfensis, lived around the same time, perhaps competing for resources. And then there were the ever-present cousins, Australopithecines. For hundreds of thousands of years, different hominins shared the same landscapes, overlapping in range and diet. This competition added another layer of difficulty. It was not enough to survive lions and hyenas. They had to survive each other. Predation, however, remained the greatest threat. Consider what it meant to be a young Homo habilis infant. Vulnerable, unable to walk, carried in a mother's arms or left in a nest while adults searched for food. Leopards, which even today are notorious for preying on primates, would have found such infants easy targets. Large eagles, too, may have attacked from the sky. Every cry, every scent, every footprint left in the dust could draw killers. For mothers and fathers, constant vigilance was the price of keeping their offspring alive. Despite all this, there are signs of resilience. Fossilized skulls and bones of Homo habilis show injuries that healed, meaning that individuals survived wounds thanks to the care of their groups. Imagine a hunter mauled by a leopard, dragged back to camp, and nursed back to health by companions. Without that support, injury meant certain death. With it, there was a chance. These acts of compassion weren't just kindness, they were survival strategies that strengthened the group as a whole. Their diet also gave them flexibility. They ate meat when they could, but they also relied on tubers, fruits, seeds, and insects. Evidence of stone tools with polish suggests they may have ground plants or cracked nuts. Opportunism was their strength. In lean times, they could shift to roots and insects. In times of plenty, they feasted on meat. This adaptability allowed them to weather fluctuations that might have destroyed more specialized animals. But the savanna was not static. As the climate continued to fluctuate, landscapes opened further. Forests retreated, and grasslands spread. With these changes came new opportunities and new challenges. Herds of grazing animals became more common, offering meat for those who dared to scavenge, or even hunt. At the same time, open landscapes reduced the safety of trees, exposing Homo habilis to predators more often. Every step forward brought new dangers to match new possibilities. One question often asked by scientists is whether Homo habilis hunted or only scavenged. The answer is still debated, but many believe they were opportunistic hunters, at least of small animals. Rabbits, lizards, and young antelope could have fallen prey to stone-wielding hands. Hunting larger animals, however, was beyond their ability. For that, they had to wait until later species like Homo erectus developed more advanced weapons and strategies. Still, even the idea of hunting marks a turning point. No ape before had dared to use tools this way. No ape had reshaped stone into a weapon. In those sharp flakes lay the seeds of everything humans would later become. Engineers, inventors, storytellers, conquerors. And yet, survival remained uncertain. Every success was balanced by failure. Every new tool carried risk. Every day demanded vigilance. This was humanity's first great test. What is remarkable is not just that Homo habilis survived, but that they set the stage for all that followed. Without them, there would be no Homo erectus, no Neanderthals, no modern humans. They were fragile, yes, But fragility wrapped around a core of resilience is sometimes the strongest force of all. Against all odds, they endured. The story of Homo habilis is not just about survival. It is about beginnings. They were not the strongest, not the fastest, not the fiercest. In fact, almost everything seemed stacked against them. And yet, from their fragile lives on the savannas of Africa, humanity itself emerged. As the Pleistocene unfolded, new challenges arrived. The climate grew more unpredictable, swinging between wetter and drier periods that reshaped ecosystems in cycles of abundance and scarcity. For species that specialized in one food source, these swings were devastating. But Homo habilis had a gift: adaptability. They could scavenge meat, dig for roots, pick fruits, or crack bones for marrow. In a world of shifting conditions, flexibility was survival. But adaptability alone could not erase the constant shadow of danger. Predators stalked every horizon. Lions, leopards, saber-toothed cats, and hyenas all hunted in overlapping ranges. Fossil evidence makes it clear that early humans were often on the menu. Skulls of Homo habilis show puncture marks that match the teeth of big cats. In life, these small hominins lived in fear. In death, they became part of the food chain. So what tipped the scales? The answer was intelligence, still small in scale, but growing rapidly. Their brains, about 600 cubic centimeters, were larger than those of Australopithecines. This expansion opened the door to problem solving that no other primate of the time could match. They figured out how to shape stones, how to use flakes as knives, how to hammer bones apart. These weren't just survival tricks. They were sparks of something greater: culture. And culture spreads. Unlike instincts, which are locked into DNA, culture can move from person to person, generation to generation. A child who watched their parent shape a stone could learn, practice, and improve. Slowly, tool-making became a tradition, a shared knowledge that bound communities together. What began as crude flakes would eventually evolve, through later species, into hand axes, spears, and eventually the technologies that define us today. Yet life for Homo habilis was still fragile. They lived in small bands, perhaps 20 or 30 individuals. Each member mattered. If a skilled toolmaker died, the group lost vital knowledge. If hunters or gatherers fell to predators, the whole band suffered. This meant cooperation was not optional. It was essential. Fossil evidence shows healed injuries that would have been fatal without care. This suggests that early humans already nursed each other, shared food, and protected the vulnerable. Compassion, as much as sharp stones, became a survival tool. Picture them at dusk. A small group gathers at the edge of a clearing, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The smell of predators hangs in the air. In the center, someone cracks bones with stones, extracting the fatty marrow. Others chew roots or share fruits gathered earlier in the day. Infants cling to their mothers, while older children watch intently as adults shape stone tools. Around them, the sounds of the African night rise: roars, howls, and screeches. Against that terrifying backdrop, these fragile humans cling to one another. This was not dominance. This was survival by the thinnest margin. And yet, that margin was enough. Over time, Homo habilis gave rise to new forms. Around 1.8 million years ago, Homo erectus appeared. Taller, stronger, with larger brains, Homo erectus would master fire, spread beyond Africa, and invent more advanced tools. But the roots of that greatness trace back to Homo habilis. Without their first experiments with stone, without their first steps toward cooperation, the path forward might never have existed. It is easy to overlook them because they lacked the grandeur of later humans. They built no monuments. They painted no caves. Their artifacts are nothing more than broken stones and scattered bones. And yet, those stones and bones tell the story of the first time humans dared to shape the world around them instead of simply enduring it. In many ways, the legacy of Homo habilis is not measured in what they achieved, but in what they endured. They endured predators that should have erased them. They endured climates that shifted beneath their feet. They endured competition from cousins and rivals. By all logic, they should not have survived. And yet they did. That endurance was the seed of everything. From their struggle came the first sparks of intelligence, the first glimmers of culture, the first hints of community. Without them, there would be no Homo erectus, no Neanderthals, no modern humans. Without them, there would be no cities, no art, no science, no story to tell. So when we speak of Homo habilis, we are not just talking about an ancient species. We are talking about the moment humanity began to fight back against the odds. The moment when everything was against us: predators, hunger, weakness, fear, and still, somehow, we endured. The lesson of Homo habilis is simple. Fragility does not mean failure. In fact, fragility can be the crucible of resilience. By being forced to adapt, to cooperate, and to innovate, our ancestors turned weakness into strength. And that pattern, born 2 million years ago, continues to define us today. The next time you hold a tool in your hand, think of them. Think of those first humans crouched on the savannah, striking stones together under the watchful eyes of predators. Think of the risks they took, the losses they suffered, and the victories they scraped from the bones of carcasses. In those humble beginnings lies the foundation of all we are. Homo habilis, the handy man, the first true human, the species that endured when everything was against them. Subscribe if you enjoyed the video.